Didn't he do that event, Newsom, saying it's all great, laying tracks for the high-speed rail? He was touting it as a great full steam ahead story.
Well, he's not being truthful with the people of California. This is a giant boondoggle. They're $2 billion short on their most optimistic projections.
How can you have a situation where the governor goes out and touts it as a success, and weeks later, the people actually on the project are saying, no, there's not enough money? How's that even possible? Hello everyone, welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. We have an extended conversation today with Susan Shelley because there are so many crazy things going on. You know, Susan brings the detail on these things, and we've got some amazing updates, shocking is probably a better word, on high-speed rail. That disaster's still going on homelessness, and some good news on a ballot initiative that you will want to hear about. So that's coming up with Susan Shelley. For most of the show today, actually. But I just wanted to start with the story that is dominating everything, of course, which is the attack on Iran, war on Iran, launched in the early hours at the end of last week. There's been so much said about it, and I just want to give you my perspective in a very direct way. And I want to start with the personal connection for me in this story. And it goes right back to my roots and my parents. My parents, of course, are Hungarian. Many of you know that. They fled communism in Hungary. Most of my family, all my family, is still in Hungary. Of course, Hungary is now not under communist rule. It's a free country. But for most of my life, for most of my childhood, certainly, Hungary was behind the Iron Curtain, and there was no freedom. And I would go back there. I was born in England. We'd go back every year, at least once a year, often twice a year when I was a kid, see my cousins and grandparents, the whole family, everyone was in Hungary. And as I got older and older, I realized what it meant not to have freedom. I remember a time when I was about 10 or 11, something like that. You may have heard me tell this story. When I was walking in the streets of my hometown, my family's hometown, Szeged, in the south of Hungary, with my cousins. And I don't know, I was just mucking about. I was a kid and saying something stupid about the then communist leader of Hungary, János Kádár. And I was yelling something about, he's an idiot or something, just mucking about. And that later that night, I remember my aunt, who was the vice principal at one of the local schools, she took me to one side and said, look, you know, in England you can say that and that's fine and it's kind of funny. I understand you were just joking around, but you can't say things like that here. You can't criticize the government or the people in charge. I could lose my job. Your cousins could get in really bad trouble. You can't say things like that. And as the years went on, I gained an appreciation of what it meant. Now, I don't want to compare life in Hungary under communism to life in Iran under the autocratic, theocratic, vicious, cruel, barbaric, evil regime of the Ayatollahs since 1979. It's much worse in Iran. I mean, look at what they do to women, to anyone who dissents. It's not just that you get in trouble or lose your job, you're tortured and executed. So it's a different league. I want to be really clear about that. But I do understand, deeply understand, the desire for freedom in a way that perhaps some who may have never experienced the opposite may take it a little bit for granted. And the reason I start with Hungary is because if you speak to any Hungarian, there's a date that's incredibly important. The biggest and most famous date in Hungarian history, if you talk to any Hungarian, 1956. They actually say 56. It's just the date in Hungarian history because after the Second World War, you had across Eastern Europe, this is what Churchill was talking about with his Iron Curtain speech. He said an Iron Curtain has descended across Europe. That's when the Soviets, after the Second World War, Stalin, basically occupied Eastern Europe. And they installed their puppet regimes in each of those countries, including Hungary. And they were oppressive, and the puppets of the Soviet Union and secret police, all that kind of stuff we associate with the Stalin era. Now, in Hungary, in 1956, the people had enough of it, and there's an uprising, a people-driven uprising. It actually started with students actually in my hometown, my family's hometown. And they thought they would throw off these authoritarian rulers and have their freedom. And you speak to anyone who was around then in Hungary, and they all say the same thing, which is they really believed that they would have help, that help would be on the way. And they thought maybe America would help, or other Western European countries would be on their side, would help somehow. And no help came. And the Soviet Union sent in the tanks and brutally crushed the revolution. Crushed it, in a vicious way. That part of it was as vicious as you've seen with the Iranian regime over the years with the people's revolutions there. I'm always reminded of that when you have these uprisings in Iran. And the first time I really thought about that was when you had the Green Revolution, as it was called, in 2009, when Obama was president. And there was this whole sense that America, with all its kind of big talk about freedom and so on, would come to help the Iranian people. Not by invading Iran. Everyone, that was after the Gulf War. Everyone could see what a disaster the Iraq invasion, Afghanistan had become. But, it really, more directly than they'd seen before, without actually, having the kind of catastrophe of an invasion. There is a halfway house between doing nothing and invading the country. But basically, Obama did nothing, effectively. And the Iranian regime crushed that revolution. And over the years, that desire for freedom was very deep and very strong. And those brave protesters in Iran and students leading it, and then women leading it, with Mahsa Amini a couple of years ago, that when she died, and the protest that was killed, I should say, and the protest that erupted after that, they wave after wave of incredibly brave protesters, always hoping that this time maybe they'd get more help. And then finally you have a president, with President Trump, who last year said very clearly, help is on the way, and we are with you, and keep going. And of course he didn't do anything immediately, and there was a little bit of a kind of, well, hang on a second, what's Trump doing? Is this going to be an Obama situation all over again? The red line, remember, with Syria, where Obama says, well, if I see a bunch of chemical weapons being moved around, that will change my calculation. Well, they did move the chemical weapons around, and it didn't change anything, and the whole credibility of US authority and deterrence collapsed. And really that's what President Trump has been restoring here, because every single time he's made a threat or put down a red line, he's actually enforced it. And you've seen that time and again. You saw it with the Iran nuclear strike, Venezuela, and all these things that he's doing to really project strength, but really to enforce deterrence, which is very, very important in a world where you've got so many dangerous actors trying to destabilize everything. And so this is where we are now. Because he didn't want to act, there was that concern that President Trump was, well, he said it and nothing's happening. And there were many people killed. Many brave Iranians came out onto the streets, and over the past couple of months it's been very brutal. But what you can see now, President Trump was doing, was moving things into place. You had Venezuela, then moving things into place. So when America acted, as it seems to me clear now, President Trump always intended that we would, he didn't make an empty threat. When he said it, he meant it. But he wanted to back it up with serious firepower. And that brings us right up to date. And the first point, therefore, I want to make is that it's incredibly important that we now have a president that has restored American deterrence totally consistently. And look what happens when you don't have that, because we saw the opposite with Biden, where nothing happened with Afghanistan, and then you have Putin invading Ukraine. That's the direct result of a failure of deterrence by Biden. And so for all the same people who go on and on about Ukraine and Russia to now turn around and criticize Trump for doing what he's done, which is restoring deterrence, US deterrence, is completely incoherent and inconsistent. So that's the first point, that by acting strongly, the president has restored American credibility and deterrence. And that is a really important thing when you have the range of things going on around the world that we need to guard against. The second point I want to make is that, people would say, well, he didn't need to say that help is on the way. That was Trump choosing to do that. And the deterrence only kicks in once he's made that promise. Didn't need to make that promise. Not our business. Stay out of it. I understand that argument very, very clearly. And I've been one of the biggest critics of the endless war thing and the invading other countries and so on. Right back in the day when I was working with David Cameron. And so I understand that very much. But again, there's a difference between enforcing order and invading other countries. There obviously is a massive range of options between doing nothing and sending 250,000 troops into Iraq and Afghanistan for decades or nearly decades. Of course there's a difference. It's not 0 or 100. There's a scale. And that's what you're seeing with Trump. This is the new Trump approach, doctrine, whatever you want to call it, where he remains, it seems to me, completely skeptical of any kind of major commitment of US forces in terms of invading a country. It's very clear. Just watch the way he talks about this. Who thinks for 1 second that Trump is talking about invading another country? He's not. And he's not hubristic about American power and what it can achieve. He's not at all. He's saying, he's being very open. Look at his first comments on this. We're going to do this. We're going to try and take out the regime, and then it's over to you. And we'll see what you can do. He's not promising that we're going to turn things around. Even today, I just noticed he was asked in the Oval Office with the German Chancellor, and he was asked, what's the worst case scenario? And he's very open and transparent about it. The president said, well, the worst case scenario, I guess, is that, we end up with a regime that's even worse than what we have. And, we'll look back in 5 years and say, well, we went through all that, but in the end, we ended up in a worse position. He's very realistic. He's a realist, but it's a calculated risk he's taking, which is that actually, in this particular situation, after all those years of demands for America to help, and you see the support from the Iranian community here in America and around the world for what's happened, incredible support for what the president has done, that actually there is a good chance that this will turn out better, and that particularly if the US doesn't invade. And you could see again the president learning the lessons just now from what he was saying, where he was saying, look at the mistakes that were made in Iraq, for example, kicking out all the Ba'ath Party and the entire infrastructure, so you have and people, so you have chaos in the country. We don't want to do that, he said. That's why he keeps saying, lay down your arms, work with us. And he made the comparison with Venezuela and the vice president, Maduro's number 2, who's now working satisfactorily with the administration, and you don't have chaos there. And so it's a totally different approach, Doesn't mean it's all going to end perfectly, of course not. But the real point I wanted to make is to invite you to think about this in the context of domestic policy too. And going back to that word deterrence, what do we think about in terms of crime in our own communities? One of the big things that's gone wrong in our country, in many countries, is that over the years you've had this ideological approach to crime, which has reduced the certainty that if you do something wrong, you will be caught and prosecuted and punished. And in all sorts of different ways, that's been undermined, where you've had what they call criminal justice reform or undermining the police, softer sentences. And so what's the result of all of that? More crime, because people know they can get away with it. It's a very simple, basic concept of deterrence. And actually, it is the same kind of thing when it comes to global affairs. And so I want to just directly get to that phrase that often comes up in this context, the world's policeman. Oh, we can't be the world's policeman. America shouldn't be the world's policeman. And that's where you get that comparison with crime. Well, okay, what's the choice? Do you want someone else to be the world's policeman, or do you want no world policeman? That's actually the choice. Either we do it, or someone else does it, or nobody does it. And I just think when you look at the options for who else could do it, who's that going to be? China? Some brutal authoritarian communist regime? You want them running the world? or Russia and these countries? No, that's unthinkable. So the real choice is either we do it or it doesn't happen, that there is no world policeman at all. And honestly, that is a choice that I think is very clearly if you really think about it, you just want to have a world where anyone can maraud around. I mean, who else is, the United Nations has got no teeth to do anything. You just want to have, rogue states and countries being handed over to terrorist regimes and countries just invading other countries with total impunity and no one does anything about it. And whether they're nation state actors or terrorist actors, just do whatever they want around the world and there are no consequences. That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to chaos and crime in our communities here at home. And I just don't think, if you actually really think about it, that that's the kind of world that we want to live in across the planet. We've got to have some kind of enforcement around the world. Of course, that doesn't mean that you're going to have a country running around invading other countries, but some kind of deterrence and enforcement against bad actors, whether that's a nation state or a terrorist group or whatever it may be, whether that's drugs through Venezuela or terrorism from the Middle East or whatever it may be. You've got to have some notion of a world policeman. And frankly, I would much rather it would be America than anyone else. And that's why I do support what the president has done here. All right, joining us now, Susan Shelley with kind of an amazing list of California waste, fraud, incompetence, all the usual beauties. There's a whole set of things around transportation. And of course, top of the list always, high-speed rail. There's some new developments and let's just guess they're not good.
They're not good. The latest draft business plan has been released by the High-Speed Rail Authority. There was a hearing on Monday in the Assembly Transportation Committee, and the committee heard from the Inspector General for High-Speed Rail and from the Legislative Analyst's Office. And what they said is that there isn't enough money to do even the first leg of the project, Merced to Bakersfield. And they're flirting with breaking the law because there was a law passed in 2022 that said we have to focus on Merced to Bakersfield because enough of this messing around, we have to get something done. And they said there must be a station in downtown Merced. Well, now the High-Speed Rail Authority wants to save $1 billion by moving it 4 miles south of downtown Merced, which makes it much less convenient because if you wind up at the station 4 miles south of where you need to be, you have to have another form of transportation to get where you're going. So that is not legal and that is not really very practical, but that's the plan. They are trying to work out whether they're going to have electrification of rails that are currently used for diesel trains. That's more expensive if they do that. If they start messing around with what's a double track, which is currently a single track, what's electrified versus what isn't electrified, it goes off the charts in cost. And they don't have enough money. The federal government has pulled the $4 billion grants. The state was suing over that, and then they dropped the lawsuit in December for unclear reasons. And the funniest thing of all is that Southern California is getting completely cheated out of what it voted for. If you remember, it was going to be a train from San Francisco to Los Angeles. That had to be the first leg. This was in the 2008 measure that the voters approved when this got started. It had to go from San Francisco to Los Angeles as a first segment. It could not be built with operated with a public subsidy or built with a tax increase. There were all these different requirements. They've gotten around every one of them. And now the final leg of the thing in the business plan goes from Bakersfield to Los Angeles on a bus, the high-speed rail bus.
I love that that's not, some hidden thing that this is actually the plan.
It's in the business plan.
It's amazing.
It's in the business plan. If you go to the Greyhound website, you can go from Bakersfield to Los Angeles 2 hours and 40 minutes for $56. Sometimes less if you go off hours. But $56, you can go from Bakersfield to Los Angeles. The whole plan for the high-speed rail was supposed to get you from San Francisco to LA in 2 hours and 40 minutes. And now you're looking at the last leg from Bakersfield to LA being 2 hours and 40 minutes on a bus. And you can go today on Greyhound. If you wait for high-speed rail, you have to wait 14 years, and that's an optimistic projection.
And a few more $1 billion.
And a few more $1 billion. And what they're trying to do, in addition, they've already extended the cap and invest money, which is $1 billion a year that they're pulling out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And where's the money coming from for that? It's coming from higher electricity rates and higher gasoline prices, and the higher price of everything you buy in California is because of this cap and trade, cap and invest, it's called now, program.
A big chunk of which is going to the high-speed rail. So the thing, it wasn't that long ago, like within, I'm going to say a couple of months, that maybe less, maybe within a month. Newsom, didn't he do that event, Newsom, in the Central Valley, saying it's all great, full speed ahead, laying tracks for the high-speed rail? Didn't he just do that?
I think what he said, if you want to be precise, is that we are entering the track laying phase, which is not quite the same as laying track. If you want to parse those words in a Clintonian fashion, that's not quite the same as actually laying the track.
So we're entering the track laying phase, right? But the point I'm making is that he was touting it as a great full steam ahead story, right? You may have heard all this stuff, Republicans trying to kill it, Trump trying to kill it, but we're leading the way, it's going to be the nation's first, blah, 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 right? He had a whole press conference just now, but you're telling me that the actual people running it, have just said, or was it the inspectors who just said, no, there's not enough money, even to do the first bit?
Right. They're $2 billion short on their most optimistic projections.
So what was he talking about? How can you have a situation where the governor goes out and touts it as a success and a positive thing that's going to happen, and weeks later, the people actually on the project are saying, no, there's not enough money? How's that even possible?
Well, he's not being truthful with the people of California, and this is a giant boondoggle. It's employing a lot of people to essentially dig a hole and fill it in again. It's not going to be a train at any point. If they try to save money in one way, they can't meet their obligations in another way. And one of the problems they have is they're relying on this cap and invest money, $1 billion a year. They need the money up front for the construction. $1 billion a year for construction doesn't help them. So what they're looking at is, could we borrow against that stream of revenue? And they can't. And the reason they can't is it's not reliable. Because the cap and trade, at the best, that cap and invest money is volatile because the permits are auctioned for different prices at different times. So it's volatile. And then the whole thing could go away because the Trump administration has targeted it. So you're not going to be able to borrow against that stream of money.
And I've said it. As governor, I'll kill it. I mean, this is just, it really does go from bad to worse. It's actually amazing when you really think about it. Of course, we joke about it. But there's something really outrageous about the fact that he told us just now that it's all fine. And then the actual people saying there's no money and it's not going to get built.
They have very optimistic budget projections, and if they get various legislative changes that the High-Speed Rail Authority says they would need, if they get everything they want and they stay on schedule and everything goes perfectly, they think they can build Merced to Bakersfield by 2033, I think. But of course, that's not going to happen.
So the point of the hearing was say, right, we can do it, but we're going to need more money.
Right. They need more money and they need legislative changes. And of the list of
For example, to allow them to move the station, that kind of thing.
They have to be allowed to move the station. They have to be allowed to drop the, this was a 2022 law that said you must focus on Merced to Bakersfield. And there must be a station in downtown Merced. Well, now to save $1 billion, the High-Speed Rail Authority is saying, well, maybe not downtown Merced, maybe 4 miles south of Merced. And this is pretty useless for transportation because then you need, if you get to 4 miles south of downtown Merced, how are you going to get to downtown Merced? So they need legislative changes in order to make the budget work, because if they have to stick to what's in the law, then it's going to be more expensive and they don't have the money.
So that itself tells you what's going on here. It's now got completely detached from any idea of something that's useful for the public. It's now this classic bureaucratic, self-fulfilling boondoggle where they're just doing it because they have to do it and they want to look like they're doing it and they want to stick to it, and no one's got the you know what to say, sorry, we're done. This is, no more good money after bad, as I will as governor. And they're just perpetuating this thing for the sake of doing it. Oh, it doesn't matter whether the station, it's so awful.
You're exactly right. They're talking about going from Palmdale to Gilroy and having the station be south of Merced, and maybe there won't be a station in Merced. The whole thing has become, just as you said, a self-fulfilling exercise in how do we not break the law while we're pretending to do this. Interestingly, if they do break the law, if they are projected to run only with a public subsidy, which the Merced to Bakersfield line is now projected to do, it's going to cost more to operate and maintain than it could possibly bring in revenue for the trains that they're going to run on that route. And that means that it will need a public subsidy, and that means it violates the law that the voters approved in 2008. So perhaps there's a case to be made that they have to go back to the ballot with these changes, and they have to ask the voters if they want to continue. So that might be the way that this ends.
To be precise, does the current business plan, their business plan, make clear that they can't operate that section without public subsidy? Is that what they are saying?
It looks to me that,
assuming?
yes, it looks to me like they are saying that with the fare box revenue and the extra revenue they think they'll get from advertising at the stations 4 miles south of Merced, it looks like they think that they will still not have enough money to cover the operating costs. And then they don't know what the financing costs are going to be because they have to get all this money up front in order to do the construction, and they don't think they can do that. So it has a lot of holes in the business plan. And if you patch up the holes and you do the math, it's not going to pencil out.
It's an amazing disaster. All right, let's move on to the other ones.
Well, speaking of disasters, all of the public transit systems in California are pretty much underwater and running with a public subsidy. And there was just a bill pulled out of the drawer, another one of these blank budget bills, AB 117. And this turned itself into a $590 million loan for BART and Muni for San Francisco area transit. And where did this money come from? Well, it came from last year's budget. So the situation is that we have a budget, but we never really have a budget because they pass all these blank bills that say this will one day be a bill related to the budget, and it's blank. And they pass it. They have a hearing in the budget committee. They pass the blank bill. They put it in the drawer. And then a year later, the governor can say, well, we really want to do this, and we need to spend money on that. And they amend that whole plan into one of the blank bills. Doesn't have to go for any further committee hearings. It's already been, quote, heard in committee, and therefore they just go straight to the floor with the amendment, and like lightning, it gets to the governor's desk, and they sign it. So they did this with $90 million for Planned Parenthood. They did an amendment to last year's budget, and now they've done it with a $590 million loan for transit in San Francisco.
That's done now, is it? It's gone.
Right, and it's a loan, so it probably doesn't show up as any kind of a budget problem because they're assuming that it's going to be repaid.
But isn't it something that's was there a ballot initiative for the Bay Area counties to pay for the BART?
There's another one. Yes, the people who are trying to bail out transit want to raise the sales tax. So there was going to be a government measure, but that would require a 2/3 vote because it's a special tax. And so now there's a group of, quote, citizens who've taken over the whole project from the government. And it's going to be a citizens' initiative tax increase. And according to the courts, that evades the 2/3 vote requirement for special taxes. It will only need a simple majority. But it's a sales tax increase, and it's already very expensive to live in California, and this doesn't help. 1% additional in San Francisco and 0.5% in 4 adjacent counties. So that would be for transit, in addition to this $590 million loan. And the problem is that they don't want to look into waste and fraud ever, and they don't want to cut back on any of the union benefits. They're always enriching those contracts better and better in terms of pay and benefits and staffing levels and all of that, and they don't want to do any efficiencies. So what they do is they tell the voters, we're going to essentially end every kind of transit that you rely on unless you vote for this tax increase. There's never a moderate plan to say, let's do some efficiencies. It's always the end of the world, or the tax increase. Those are your choices. And so that will be on either the June or November ballot if they get all those signatures.
Sorry, who's pushing for the signatures?
This is a group called Connect. It's called Bay Area Connect.
Yeah, I bet it's the
BayAreaConnect.com.
unions, is it?
It probably is the unions, yes, but it's citizens groups of people who care about transit.
So the thing that these two things have in common is that it's just this massive, it's a part, we discussed the high-speed rail in terms of the way that it's now this bureaucratic, self-perpetuating thing of its own. But the thing they both have in common is this classic thing that you get from the left here in California on so many issues, which is just trying to impose an ideology on actual lived reality. So they have this whole idea. We want people in transit. We want them to take trains. We don't want cars. The climate obsession is underlying all this stuff. That was the original. I mean, I wrote about this in my book, Califalia, that if you go right back to the original impetus for the high-speed rail, it was get people out of cars. And then even on their own assumptions, the number of car journeys they would have displaced was absolutely minuscule. But that's what this is all about. And actually, that's just not how California has developed. And they keep saying, oh, we want to be like Europe and everyone. And I know Europe, like better than most of these people. It's just completely different. You've got cities like London and there's sort of medieval street plans, little streets and very dense and apartment built. It's just totally different in California, developed in the last century in a completely different way, with space and freeway, and this whole California type of living. Single family homes in the suburbs, that's what we love about California. And they're trying to crush it and impose some template that just doesn't fit with how we do things here.
That's exactly right. And it's ideological, as you said, that everyone should live in an apartment on top of train tracks and that any other kind of construction is sprawl and unsustainable and bad for the climate. And obviously what California does has no effect on the climate because this is just too small a piece of the picture. So we could fall off into the ocean in California and the climate wouldn't know the difference. With what's going on in China, for instance, 62% of the electricity that's generated in China comes from coal as of 2023. So that's a much bigger impact if you even accept that this is a problem that is man-made and catastrophic, and some people don't accept that. But even if you do, what California is doing doesn't affect it. It just raises prices in California, and we're seeing that. And interestingly, they are writing new regulations right now for the Cap and Invest program. They're having a big fight because the legislature is leaning on CARB, the California Air Resources Board, to try and make things more affordable. Well, how do they do that? They give away some of these permits to emit greenhouse gases to the utilities in order to either try to bring the rates down or not up as fast, or to create funding for these climate credits where they try to give rebates to people to cover the fact that they've raised their rates considerably with this same program. So they're having a fight over how many do you give away versus how many do you have to auction off in order to fund all the nonsense that they're funding with this greenhouse gas reduction fund. It's a tax. The court said it's not a tax, but it's a tax in every respect. And so they're having this fight, not in the legislature, but in the California Air Resources Board regulatory hearings. So this is a mess. This is no way to govern a state like California.
Exactly. It just needs to be swept away. And we've got to be really clear about that. And I think that's, as switching to my campaign, and on the road, I'm just I don't think we've been clear enough about that for years. And you've had Republican candidates who've sort of gone along with it all and, oh yeah, environment. Yeah, of course we love the environment. But I actually had a question on it yesterday in my town hall in Glenn County, and lovely question. And the guy said, I just want to know where you stand on conservation. And I spoke very passionately about conservation because I love our environment and our natural spaces and the magnificent natural wonders we have in California, and that we want to protect our state parks and national parks and our landscape. That's all true. That's got nothing to do with what you've seen with the environmental movement. It's gone from that kind of beautiful, unifying vision of which I think all Californians feel is really part of our culture here, which is loving nature, to this incredibly narrow ideological focus on climate change and within that carbon emissions, to the exclusion of all else. We've got to just confront it and say, this is insane now. And it's really driving the cost and the hassle and all the reasons California is just impossible to live in or run a business in.
You're exactly right. And the governor has only been interested in shifting blame. So first he tried to blame the oil companies, and there were 2 special sessions called in order to crack down on the oil companies for high prices. And what did they find? Well, of course, they found that there's nothing the oil companies are doing that's causing the high prices. It's the regulations in California that are causing the situation and the higher prices for California residents. So what they did is they created regulations on profits and regulations on inventory. And the result was 2 more refineries closed and said, well, we're out. We're not interested in this anymore. And what's that doing? That's driving the price higher and making us more vulnerable to supply disruptions. So now we're importing gasoline. Well, that's not very climate efficient or good for the environment. And now the governor's blaming the war in Iran for the spike in prices. It's really not the war in Iran. It's California's regulations, which is why this isn't happening in other states. It's only happening here.
One last thing on transportation before we move on. I mean, you could say it's a small thing, but it's just yet another one. The LAX, the airport, what do they call it? The people mover.
The people mover, yes.
It's supposed to be, I mean, I use LAX a lot. I mean, I've, as little as possible, but I have to. Much prefer Burbank if we can. This has been going on for years, this construction. The whole thing's been a mess. The whole airport area just disrupted by construction. You can see the thing sort of snaking around. And it was supposed to be ready for the Olympics. And now we're hearing that it might not open till after the Olympics.
Oh, it's billions of dollars, and it's at least $1 billion over budget, I believe, and it's way over schedule. And, it's just a little people mover train at the airport, but you can't build anything in California efficiently. It's just a mess here.
There we are. Okay, next disaster.
Well, the next disaster is homelessness. Once again, the governor was on television saying that he's going to put another $291 million, billion dollars, who knows what it is, $1 million, I guess, into the care courts. And the care courts are a failure. This was another one of these ideas that we're going to solve homelessness just before an election so that it looks like we're doing something. Then on the other side of the election, when it doesn't work, it's somebody else's problem. Well, Care Courts was one of those programs. I think it started in 2022. And the idea was that people could petition the courts for a care program for someone who was mentally ill or in substance abuse situations, and then the court could order treatment. But the whole thing is voluntary. And so it doesn't really work. Supposedly it was going to help up to 12,000 people. It's been, I think, less than 3,000 people that have been involved in the program, and only about 19 statewide, according to CalMatters, graduated, they use the term, through the program. So it's not going well. And, the homelessness situation is handled so badly in California, and it's so heartbreaking because one of the things that we could do that would make it so much better is ask the federal government, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare, for a waiver so that we could build large hospitals for mental health care and have that care reimbursed by Medicaid, Medi-Cal, as it's called here. So that is something that was prohibited in 1965, but the first Trump administration allowed waivers. And if we get a waiver, then people who are treated in large facilities, their care can be reimbursed. You get that 50% from the federal government. Otherwise, it's all on California. In order to get reimbursed under this 1965 law, the facility in which you're provided mental health care has to have 16 beds or less. Well, this is insane because now you need building after building. Well, who benefits from that? Well, the unions that build the buildings benefit from that because all these buildings, prevailing wage, union contracts, all the rest of it, because it's a publicly funded project. Well, building after building with 16 beds, this is the plan from, was it Prop 1 that Governor Newsom promoted, where it's $6 billion for buildings and taking money away from the counties for services to use for housing. And it's all in this 1965 framework that you can't have a large hospital. Now, of course, a large hospital is not right for everyone, but it's essential for some people. If we could fix that one thing, if we could get that waiver and use large hospitals for mental health care, then we would have enough beds. Because guess where they are now? They're in prison. They're in jail. The Los Angeles County Jail is the nation's largest mental health facility, and that is disgusting.
Exactly. You put me onto this literally years ago, Susan, and I've written about it, and I talk about it every time when people ask me, "What's your plan for homelessness?" And you need to explain it just as clearly as you've just done. And I basically say what you just said at these town halls, and people can't believe it. And actually the way I put it is, I imagine if just in regular medical care, if we couldn't have hospitals with more than 16 beds, how crazily inefficient that would be. That's what we're dealing with in relation to mental health. It's
Exactly.
insane.
Exactly. And there are hospitals that could be converted, that could be mental health facilities, and then there would be enough beds. And it would be financially more efficient. And I understand the concern about involuntary care. But the solution is not to leave people on bus benches screaming. The solution is to have a parallel program of legal help for people who are in that situation to make sure that their rights are protected and that they're getting the care that's appropriate.
And it's classic Gavin Newsom, this care court thing. It's like, well, let's have, instead of actually solving the problem, let's have some gimmick that we announce, and then no one's going to pay attention when it's just a total fiasco and a disaster. But this is what he does the whole time. I mean, I'm going to be in San Diego soon. There's real concerns in San Diego of homelessness being swept onto Caltrans, that's the state transportation agency, onto sort of freeway underpasses and all that kind of thing. This is what Gavin Newsom, a year and a half ago, did a whole kind of announcement about, and he did a photo op, literally by a freeway in LA, clearing in the homeless encampment, and said, "We're going to deal with this." And then he said, "If we don't deal with this, we don't deserve to be in power." That was his quote. That was, I think it was August 2024. In August 2025, he announces a new thing, as if he'd never said the first thing, to deal with Caltrans. That's a year late. Now, it turns out we're hearing in San Diego, it's got worse. He just keeps saying these things. Nothing ever happens. Gimmick after gimmick. It's just like with the high-speed rail. It's just insane to me how utterly, I don't know, I don't even have the words to explain it. It's not incompetence. It's much worse than that. It's a total disregard for any kind of basic aspect of governance, of running anything. It's just saying things.
Yes, it's saying things to get past the next election all the time. And that's been the pattern. Every 2 years we have a new shakeup of the something that manages the problem, but it's not changing anything. So here in Los Angeles, we had the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, and because it wasn't running efficiently, there was a Blue Ribbon Commission, and then there was a leadership table, and now the county has pulled its funding out of LAHSA, but that doesn't mean that LAHSA is closing. So we keep the LAHSA bureaucracy, and now we have a new county bureaucracy called the Department of Homeless Services and Housing. And that's in addition to the Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, and that's in addition to what's in all the different cities, including Los Angeles. So it's a lot of the same people running the same thing, but calling the panel something else. Is it the Blue Ribbon Commission? Is it the leadership table? Is it the new department? Is it the old department? Is it the board? They're not fixing the problem. We need more beds. We need more shelters. We need more compulsion, to be frank, because you can't have people having the option to live on the streets and to live on the bus benches and to live on the beaches and to live in the parks and to live on the side of the freeway. That can't be one of the options that's open to people. It's not safe for them. It's not good for anyone else.
You've given me an idea, actually, Susan. So I'm going to say, watch this space to see how quickly we can turn this around. Because we've been working, a few weeks ago, people may remember I announced as part of my campaign, CalDOGE, the California Department of Government Efficiency. We've got a whole team there, volunteers. No, it's like for free as part of the campaign. And we're already doing the work to find fraud, and we've uncovered some of it. Much more to come. But when I set up CalDOGE, there are two distinct parts to it. One part is fraud, finding fraud and waste and corruption in terms of spending of money. But the second part is, in a way, the deeper question of government efficiency. And I got someone running that who worked on this with Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was governor, at the California Performance Review. And it was a guy called Paul Miner. and he's now working with me. And that's the task there, is to find all the unbelievable waste and bureaucracy structurally in California government, all these endless agencies that duplicate functions, both with each other statewide, where you've got so many different agencies all having something to do with energy and climate and all that kind of stuff. And you can repeat that in different areas. And then, of course, duplicate at the county level and the city level. So just kind of, drowning in bureaucracy, in agencies and commissions and whatever, all of them being paid, all of them churning out reports that no one reads and strategies that never get implemented. And they will probably have a communications person paid 200 grand a year, etc. Right? And they have offices that we pay for, that no one goes to work in, but we're probably still paying for the office. There's just this incredible, sprawling, bloated bureaucracy. And so that's something we need to address as well. So that part of CalDOJ, we haven't done anything yet. And I've just been talking to the team about what's our first report. We've had some really good fraud stories out there in the last couple of weeks. The money from the cannabis tax that was supposed to go for substance abuse prevention, $370 million actually going to Democrat front organizations for voter registration. Similar deal with solar panels. Did you see this one we did at the end of last week? This is $1 billion, $100 million a year, supposed to be going to install solar panels on low-income apartment buildings. $1 billion now been spent. The actual amount spent on actual solar panels, 72 million, 928 million. And then when you trace the money, yet again, it's all these activist groups and, community. It's building the Democrat machine. So we've done some good fraud stories. I think this homelessness thing, what you've just highlighted, is a really good area to look into. Like, what are all the endless bureaucracies supposedly dealing with homelessness while the problem gets worse?
Exactly. And I believe there is a hospital that is owned by the publisher of the Los Angeles Times that he wanted to convert to a mental health hospital and couldn't get the permission for it. And it's related to this 1965 law. But if you were to talk to Dr. Oz about getting a waiver from that department, I think you would find very quickly that this problem could be solved. But the governor has to ask for it. It's easy to talk about how what they're doing doesn't work, but what's the solution? And here's a solution that's right in front of us. There are federal dollars that we would be entitled to for mental health care in large hospitals, but there's a tremendously powerful lobby against that. They want the community centers, they want more buildings, the unions that build the buildings, the various people who own those clinics. That's a lobby against large hospitals. But the fact remains that we don't have enough beds. People are being treated in prisons and jails. That's not a good system. We can do better.
I was going to ask you, the last question on this is where you got to. I just want to push a bit further. So why would anyone be against this? And other states have done it. And so you're saying, as always in California, you follow the money. It's the corruption. It's the interests that benefit from the small units.
Right. There are associations that represent those businesses, and they are the first ones to write the letters saying, you can't ask for this waiver. So that's the problem. It's politics in Sacramento. It's lobbyists. But the bigger picture here is we have a humanitarian crisis. There are solutions to at least part of the problem, maybe not all of it, but part of it. And the solution is not to build low-income housing at $1 million a unit and give it to people who are in tents right now and say, aha, they have to stay in the tent till we finish the building. That's not a solution.
But also give people an apartment building costing $1 million without getting them on some kind of drug rehab program.
Right. And the drug rehab program is optional and it's down the street. The services are wraparound. It's all voluntary. But why is compulsion reserved only for the taxpayers? Why is compulsion reserved only for the businesses that have to endure having homeless encampments on the sidewalk in front of their business? Why is the compulsion reserved only for the people who park at the meter and not the people who camp next to the meter? What is the situation here? This can't continue.
Brilliant point. Brilliantly put. Oh, great. Susan, I'm going to have to leave it there, I think.
Can we say quickly that the Safe
Oh,
Proposition
yes,
13?
Prop 13, very important. Yeah,
Very
yeah.
important. The Local Taxpayer Protection Act to save Prop 13 is headed for the November ballot. We have turned in 1.3 million signatures, a little more than that, and they're being counted at the county offices now. Then there will be a random sample check of the validity, and then if we make it, I think we're on the November ballot in 2026, later this year.
This is huge. This is absolutely huge. And it's such great news because it was interesting because there's been a lot of attention on the voter ID ballot initiative, and Carl DeMaio, and I've been working with Carl and others on that, and that's been going really well. And we've had progress reports on that. And there was that sense, and now you've talked about the Save Prop 13 right from the beginning, and you had this innovative way with how Jarvis Taxpayers Association of having people send their signatures in and so on. We've had less, like I remember thinking, oh wow, I hope it just doesn't seem like the pace is there, but it sounds like it's really delivered. You've really delivered that.
Well, there was a big coalition working on it, and it came together, and we're very excited to say that we were able to turn in, we believe, enough signatures to qualify when they're all validated. So we're very excited about that.
It's really important. And then again, it's like voter ID, which is it's going to pass, right? I mean, it's very popular.
It's very popular, and it's very important because the courts have been erasing your taxpayer protections, and we're going to put them back. And that's all this is doing. It should not be easier to raise your taxes. It should be as hard as the Constitution says it should be.
Exactly, and especially since it was so outrageous what they did in 2024 when you qualified it, the previous version of this.
Yes.
And then they took it off the ballot outrageously. Gavin Newsom's puppet Supreme Court.
Yes,
Disgusting.
the governors sued, the legislature and the governors sued to have it taken off the ballot. They said this does too much, and the Supreme Court said, hey, yeah, fine, and they took it off the ballot. Instead of saying, well, let's just see if the voters approve it, and then we'll look at what's constitutional, which is the way that it had always been done before, but they chose to just take it off the ballot and not give the voters democracy.
So for now, no further action. The work's been done. Thank you very much. Once we're confirmed for the ballot, then we'll obviously have a conversation about that and how important it is to campaign for it and make sure we get that big vote. And the other reason I think it's really important, just like with voter ID, I think it's going to be incredibly important for getting a good turnout for me and for all the Republican candidates. That's the way you win in a midterm, a big turnout, get the vote out.
Yes.
And these two ballot initiatives are going to be incredibly powerful because they are particularly popular with Republicans. So it's really fantastic that they're going to be on the ballot. Really good news.
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, that's our show for today. Always learn so much from Susan. Thank you very much for being with us. Come along to our town halls, our Cal-affordable town halls up and down the state of California. Watch our social media for that at Steve Hilton X. And of course, make sure you come back next week for the next episode of The Steve Hilton Show. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts.